What's going on, money makers? Welcome back to the Travis Makes Money podcast, where it's our mission to help you make more money. Today on the show, we are talking a little bit about commercial fishing and then some recruiting and stuff as well. So with my new friend, Stephen Perry. Stephen launched his first business at 15 after working as a commercial fisherman in Alaska. He went on to lead top producing teams at a Fortune 100 firm, generating millions in revenue over 17 years. Back in 2023, he stepped away from a $900,000 a year role to follow a faith-led calling, founding The Well Recruiting Solutions with his wife. Now with a team of over 20 people, they've helped generate revenue for advisory firms and aim to support 1,000 more by 2030. But before we jump into this conversation with Steve, if you're an entrepreneur or a solopreneur using multiple softwares for marketing, email forms, calendars, all of the above, you might be doing it wrong. You owe it to yourself to go check out High Level's all-in-one platform for marketing automation so you can get back to focusing on what you know how to do best. They've created an amazing tool over there that's somehow as simple as it is capable. So join 3 million other businesses and go to gohighlevel.com/Travis for a free 30-day trial to see what High Level can do for you. Now, without further ado, Steve, what's up, man? Welcome to the show.
Hey, Travis, thank you so much for having me.
So it's atypical to talk to somebody who's making $900,000 a year who left the job. Why'd you do it?
Couple reasons. Certainly I wouldn't have done it if I didn't feel like it was the calling that God had on my life. And being very clear about what I felt like my mission and my purpose in life was. But ultimately, I'm looking up and I have a great income, but I didn't own anything. And the day I left that job was the day that there was no more equity, there was no more income, and I knew that when I turned 60 years old, I was going to look back and wish I had done something different for all those years.
What was the first dollar you ever made?
First dollar I ever made was commercial fishing, actually. So, I tell the story. That was my introduction to entrepreneurship, because all those guys were small business owners that hired 14-year-old kids like me to do a lot of the hard labor. And I remember, so I was there for a month. You working 100+ hours a week, freezing cold out there in the ocean. And at the end of the month, I got like a check for almost $3,000, which is pretty good for a 14-year-old kid.
Oh, no kidding.
But I was also reasonably good at math. And so I was able to kind of figure out, well, geez, we caught these many thousands of pounds of salmon a day, and salmon is this price. And like, someone's making a lot of money here, and it wasn't me. And so I'm pretty sure it was the owner, and I think I want to be the owner. And so that was kind of my intro to I want to own my own business.
Okay, so when you quit that job, was it college around the corner?
No, I was
already knew you wanted to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I was 14 years old. And so I got home from fish camp, and the summer was just about over, so there was nothing to do that year. But next summer, I started my own asphalt maintenance company. And so, driveway seal coating. My neighborhood was like the next to the nice neighborhood, so I didn't have to walk very far. And I literally would just go up and down the neighborhood hanging out flyers or door hangers and offer to seal coat someone's driveway. And back then I would take my mom's minivan and go to Lowe's and buy all the 5-gallon buckets and load it up and get the brush and the broom, and I would seal coat their driveway, and they paid me a couple $100. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. That's way better than $9 an hour at McDonald's.
So what did you make that summer doing that?
I don't remember. It was thousands, maybe 8,000, 9,000. I know by the end, I ran that every summer through high school and through college. And by the end, we were doing 6 figures in business. I had trucks, trailers, equipment, employees. And the only mistake I made, Travis, was I didn't sell the company. I didn't realize you could sell a company. And so I literally closed it down.
Yeah, what did you end up going to school for?
So my freshman year of college, I had a full ride naval ROTC scholarship, and I went to Point Loma Nazarene University. I was a management information systems major. I thought I wanted to build websites for people. But relevant to this show, I remember my first day in naval science class, they give you this piece of paper, and it has down the left side, all the different officer ranks, and on the top, how many years you have to serve to get those ranks. And my dad's a retired lieutenant commander. He went to the Naval Academy. And so my eyes automatically go down to the bottom right, and it's okay, if you work 20 years in the Navy and you do everything right, you don't get in trouble, which I knew that wasn't going to happen for me. I was going to get in trouble. You can be making $100,000 a year. And I'm I'm already making that in my company in the summertime. So this is a no-go. And so that was it. I was done. Gave up the scholarship, and I moved back to Alaska and started going to University of Alaska Anchorage, switched to finance. and I graduated in 2.5 years because that's the most miserable school in the world to go to. But it was cheap and it gave me a piece of paper, and then I was off and running after that.
So that was the industry that you ended up getting a job in?
So I'm sorry, no, so I moved into financial services. So I started a New York Life Insurance Company when I was 20 years old, and life insurance. I was an intern and ended up being the top producing intern, which wasn't, I think I made like 20 grand that year. And then they gave me a full-time position. I got my securities license or investment licenses and spent 4.5 years building a book of business as an advisor. And what happened though, Travis, is like, I don't know if you've ever been to Alaska. I'm not a great Alaskan. I sound outdoorsy because I was commercial fishing and doing all that stuff, but I didn't live to do that stuff. And I wanted out of Alaska. The other thing is there's only so many people that live up there, and I knew I wanted to get married. And because I was in business, you just network a lot and I'm like, I think I know every single eligible female in this state, and none of them is my wife. And so she's somewhere else in the rest of the United States, so I got to get out of here. And fortunately, I met her. She wasn't there. She was in Colorado. She moved back to Alaska to marry me, and she said, but you have to get me out of here. And so I couldn't stay as an advisor because we didn't have Zoom back then. And if you were to pick up and move somewhere else, you're literally giving up this asset that you've built all these years. It was the hardest thing in the world to do, and starting over. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. So I moved into leadership, where I would be recruiting, coaching, developing, building a team of advisors. And I knew if I did that well, at some point I would, get ranked amongst all my peers. And as an office came open, they would move me there, give me that office to run. So that was the plan. And ultimately, 5 years later, I had that opportunity to move to exotic Lubbock, Texas, and run the West Texas office for them. But we got out of Alaska, and it was much warmer there, so that was great. And so I ran that office for a couple years.
Different there, yeah. I don't know if that's what your wife had in mind when she was asking to leave Alaska.
I'm certain it was.
But maybe on second thought, Alaska's not too bad.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah. What were some of the lessons that you took away from your early years in the insurance financial services space?
Yeah, they kept it super basic. It's like you got to reach out to 30 people a day. You got to set 2 appointments a day. You got to get 20 new referrals a week. And I was like, okay, I could do that. And I didn't do it every week, but that's ultimately what making money comes down to, is are you willing to put yourself in a position to be embarrassed, to be told no? And if you are, whoever's willing to do that the most times is going to figure it out the fastest and win that game.
And so that was what was ultimately driving the significant revenue and income stream that you built for yourself.
Yeah, initially, it allowed me to stay in the game long enough to figure it out, right? Because I was 20 years old. I was starting, the group of people that I was hired with was the #1 producing group out of 600 in the whole country, in Alaska. And I was the bottom of the barrel. So I was always the guy with the lowest numbers every single month. Thankfully though, right? Because that sets the bar up here and you're trying to compete with them. So ultimately,
it shows you that it's possible.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it gives you that vision.
Yeah, if you're by yourself, it's kind of difficult. You just you hang it up because you just kind of go well, it's impossible. I tried and it's not working, so let me do something different. But when you're in an environment where you see other people doing the exact same thing that you're doing, crushing it, you're like, okay, well, it's clearly not just a factor of, the vehicle. It's a factor of my skill set or something that I'm doing incorrectly. And that can be learned through repetition and training.
Totally, 100%. Yep.
So how long before you were making serious money doing that?
I would say by the time I was 30, 31 years old, I was making over $500,000 a year, where, we were giving probably 30 to 40% of our income away. We were saving another, 30%, and living on 20, 30%. I had a nicer house than I'd ever been to growing up in my life. Country club, 7 Series, all this stuff. And we were flipping houses, real estate investment, all of the different things that you're supposed to be doing. And I will tell you, right, I was more successful than I thought I would ever be, than I'd ever met anyone had been. And now I know it was nothing, right? But it was a really cool experience to have that early in life, because it had happened multiple times. I never thought I'd make $250,000 a year. Never thought I'd make $500,000 a year. And it's okay, is this it? And so really forced me to think, is another comma, is that going to make me that much happier? Is another 1,000 square feet going to make me that much happier? And so it really forced me to do deep work, and my wife and I to do deep work and really figure out like what are our priorities and values as a family. What do I feel like I was put on this earth to do? And so then that helped frame the rest of my life. Ultimately now where I was able to leave that because I knew it was really important to build something even more impactful.
Let's talk personal finance during this time. You mentioned a few percentages there.
Yeah.
Can you delve into that a little bit further? Like what were you doing with the money? When you're making enough income where you have all of your expenses taken care of and still have plenty of money coming in on top of that, what were you doing with the excess?
Yeah, so I was in the life insurance business, so I had a lot of cash value life insurance. We were
Okay.
I don't know, $5,000-$10,000 a month going into that. We had Lubbock was cheap, so we had
Was that whole life or IULs or
whole life, and VUL for me was what I was doing, and the VUL was the bulk of it because that was flexible. You could put more or less in depending on how good the month or the quarter was, and so so I say like at the peak it was 5 or 10 grand going into that.
Can you talk about the why,
Yeah.
the advantages of using insurance as a kind of a wealth storage option?
Yep. Yeah. So the accessibility of it, right? So when you put money into that policy, anything over and above the required amount to pay for the life insurance component, that goes into the cash value, the investment aspect of it. And if it's in whole life, that's a savings account, a high yield savings account that maybe gets you 3, 4, 5% a year. On the VUL side of things, you're picking mutual funds, and that's going to do whatever a mutual fund does. But the benefit of it is all of the growth is not taxed. So you then access it just like you would a Roth IRA, except you don't have to wait till you're 60 to pull out or follow any of the rules. So for a guy like me to then leave at 37 years old, if I had loaded up a Roth IRA or my 401k, that money would be much more illiquid or have penalties than it. For me, it worked out really well because I had access to all of that. And now sitting here 20 months without a paycheck, like I'm able to use that stuff, whereas I would have been heavily penalized in the other tools.
So you can pull out of the cash value with zero penalties. Were you pulling the actual value out, or were you borrowing against it?
Yep, I was borrowing against it. So I actually would have a line of credit set up on some of the policies. I had what's called an insurance-backed line of credit set up on that, which would be a floating rate, and I would borrow against that. Reason being, it was simpler because I had multiple policies and I would have to fill out paperwork for every one of them every time I wanted to pull money out. And then every year they would just true up that balance. Oftentimes I would use it for an investment to, flip a house or, an opportunity of some sort. And then after the transaction was completed and recapitalized, I'd put the money back in.
Which is cool as an investment vehicle too, because if you're borrowing against the cash value, you're not interrupting compound interest in the account itself, right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So the money gets to stay there in the mutual fund or whatever it is that you had the money in at that time. And if you have money just sitting in the S&P and you want to do something with it, you could probably take money out against it as well to some degree of net worth or some other number. But if you take money out of the account, you're interrupting the magic of the compound interest to use that money to flip a house, or to use that money, maybe you lose the money, or maybe the market goes down or something like that. It can be really cool to be able to leave that money in there working for you and to be able to use it somewhere else to also work for you there. It's almost like you're earning double on the money, right?
Yeah, interest rate arbitrage with your intellectual capital or your ability.
And there's no limit on what you can put in those vehicles?
To get the tax benefits, it's limited by how much of a death benefit, a life insurance benefit you have. So there's, certain internal revenue code calculations that say you can put up to a certain amount in on an annual basis to still maintain.
As a percentage of the death benefit, basically?
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Yeah, I'm just really curious about these things, man, because people don't know this stuff exists. They barely learned that they can put their money in the S&P. They barely understand the idea of compound interest, let alone that there's these insurance. Like, wait, what? You're investing in insurance? That just always heard, when they say buy term, invest the rest, or whatever. So you would be kind of almost anti that sentiment.
It has its places. And candidly, Travis, if I had to go do it again, I wouldn't have put it in the VUL stuff. I would only have put it in the fixed account. And the reason being for that is total life risk mitigation or risk allocation. So like right now, my business, think of it as a small cap, micro cap business, right? Super volatile, super risky. So to balance that out, I need money that's not at risk. So in a whole life policy that's guaranteed to go up, not a lot, but a little bit every year, so that I know, like, if the market's down or the economy's down, right, that grew last year. So I can liquidate some of that to take and capitalize that. Because when it's down, that's when you want to buy, right? So whether I'm buying a stock or investing in my business to grow, I wish more of my liquid reserves was in guaranteed growth versus volatile.
Interesting. Okay. So do you keep any money just in like a bank account or a mutual fund account or something like that?
Yeah. Operating account, right? So I'll keep, 100 grand ish in my
Like
Wells
kind of
Fargo
like an
account.
emergency savings account type of
Yeah.
thing. Like if you gotta whatever, get new brakes or get a new
Yeah.
car for some reason, whatever, it comes out of that. And then it's like whatever you need to be super liquid and very accessible.
Yep.
Yeah. Tell me about the business. Where did Well Recruiting Solutions come in? And you mentioned earlier that you were kind of already like searching for something else. Why did you end up landing on this? And how long did it take you to actually leave your full-time thing to work on this full-time?
Yeah, so probably April of 2023, my wife and I knew, all right, we're leaving. So I thought I was going to buy a firm. So I looked for a lot of different opportunities to buy firms. I found one, went back and forth for a month and a half, due diligence, meeting the team, all of that kind of stuff. Got a week away from signing a contract, met with my boss and said, hey, September, I probably won't be here at the end of the year. Just want to give you a heads up. The next week, the deal to buy the firm fell through. The next week, they fired me after 17 years. And so I was starting at zero. I went and interviewed the next week with the head of talent at a $800 billion asset management company. And 5 minutes into me telling her my story, she said, you can't work for somebody else. You have to start your own business. And so that was the last and only interview I ever did. And so I would literally wake up, Travis, on Monday. I'd pray, I'd read my Bible and be like, all right, Lord, what do you want me to look at this week? And I'd hear him say, like, go to Texas and follow Riley around in his business for the week. So I'd buy a plane ticket, I'd go see Riley down in Texas, and I'd follow him around for a week, learn the business model, and then, do some research and then pray. And Lord, is that it? Nope, that's not it. Okay, I want you to call these people. So I would call whatever people's name came to mind and ask them questions. And so every week I basically got an assignment, and then from that, a need became very clear for a recruiting solution within the wealth management space that I ended up building.
Why did they say that you weren't going to be able to get a job?
Well, I was too independent, too creative, too fast moving, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, you're blissfully unemployable.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay, so your recruiting firm is built specifically for the financial services space.
Yep.
Is there a certain vertical or lever within that space that you try to focus on the most?
Yeah, so independent wealth management firms from 10 to 100 employees that are doing a couple million to 100 million in revenue a year, that have a none or minimal talent acquisition department that are growing. And what we find, we're not cheap, we're pretty white glove, expensive recruiting service. And so we find people are much more willing to pay for us if we're going to hire someone for them that's going to bring revenue into their firm. So it's typically some kind of financial advisor, and we're really good at finding that. And so we do that. And then, as you know, when you create more revenue, that creates more problems, and you need to hire more people to fix those problems, and we're there for them. So
yeah, that's great. How have you found that business? Like, comparatively to looking at a field that you did, you did that for 17 years. That's not a small amount of time. Obviously, the majority of your working career was spent in working for other people, and now you have your own thing. Doing this exact same for the companies you're working for, just getting the employee version or a contractor version of what that pay looked like. So I can just take those skills, apply them to something very similar, solve a unique problem, fix some processes and things like that, serve a unique customer, or find the thing that you do a little bit differently, your unique selling proposition, and be in a completely adjacent field, but be able to take, a bigger reward on the back end.
Perfectly said. Yeah, you nailed it. Absolutely.
So is this kind of like the thing for you now? Is like you mentioned $1 billion, is that the goal?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The goal is to get there and then have some type of exit. And then for me, it's about funding, nonprofits and mission work all around the world, and taking that and then encouraging entrepreneurs who've been extremely successful, like I said earlier, who have more money than they've ever made in their life, and helping them find purpose with that.
Yeah, love it, man. Where do people go to get more from you, Steve?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, too much. So if you don't like me, don't go on LinkedIn and follow me. If there was anything that resonated with you, I post a lot on there. Very candid, very transparent. And then, if you happen to be, in owning a company where you're hiring people, I've got a cool little giveaway called hirethewell.com, and it's the top 10 interview questions that you might want to ask to make sure you get the right person every single time. So you can get that for free on there, and then, I'll send you our website and learn more about us.
hirethewell.com, or go check out Steve Perry over on LinkedIn and listen to some of the content he's putting out there. He's clearly mastered a lot of different skill sets to be able to earn as much money as he was for working for somebody else, and then to be able to translate that into, hyper growth in a business, to go from 0 to 30 employees in 2 years flat is no small task. So congratulations on the success, Steve, both to you and your wife. I wish you nothing but the best. Everybody else listening, remember, money only solves your money problems. But it's a little bit easier to solve the rest of your problems if you got some money in the bank. So let's solve that problem first here on the Travis Makes Money podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Catch you guys next time. Peace out.